Just know that every man I kill, the farther away from home I feel.
What if one mission during World War II could decide the fate of an entire family? Hubble Saving Private Ryan 1998 is packed with unforgettable action, emotional moments, hidden facts, and behind the scenes secrets you probably never knew. Stay with Filmy Review Hub for an in depth movie review, amazing facts, and an ending breakdown you won't want to miss. Saving Private Ryan is a 1998 American epic war movie directed by Steven Spielberg and written by Robert Roda. The story takes place in Normandy, France in 1944 during the height of World War II. It follows a group of US soldiers led by Captain John Miller, played by Tom Hanks, as they are sent on a dangerous mission to find Private James Francis Ryan, played by Matt Damon. Ryan's three brothers have all been killed in combat, and the military decides he should be brought home safely so his family doesn't lose all of their sons. Along the way, Captain Miller and his squad face intense battles, impossible decisions, and heartbreaking sacrifices while trying to complete a mission that seems almost impossible. The movie also features strong performances from Edward Burns, Tom Sizemore, Jeremy Davies, and several other talented actors who help bring the emotional story to life. The idea for Saving Private Ryan was inspired by the books of historian Stephen E. Ambrose and by true stories about families who lost multiple sons during World War II, including the famous Sullivan brothers and the Niland brothers. Robert Rodat wrote the screenplay, and Paramount Pictures brought him on to finish developing the script. Once Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks became involved, the project quickly gained momentum because both had already earned huge success in Hollywood. Spielberg wanted the movie to feel as real and authentic as possible. To achieve that goal, he worked with writers Frank Darabont and Scott Frank, who helped improve the script based on detailed research and interviews with World War II veterans. Before filming even started, the main cast went through an intense week-long military boot camp to experience the physical and emotional challenges soldiers faced during the war. Filming took place between June and September 1997, mostly on location in England and Ireland, with a production budget of around $65 to $70 million. One of the biggest challenges was recreating the famous Omaha Beach landing. That opening battle alone took about 4 weeks to shoot, cost nearly $12 million, and involved around 500 background actors, making it one of the most ambitious battle scenes ever filmed. Saving Private Ryan was released in theaters on July 24, 1998, and quickly became one of the biggest movies of the year. Audiences and critics praised the film for its emotional storytelling, incredible performances, and especially its brutally realistic portrayal of war. Many World War II veterans said the combat scenes felt more authentic than anything they had ever seen in a movie. Some veterans even admitted they found the opening battle so realistic that they couldn't finish watching it because it brought back painful memories from their own experiences during the war. The movie became a huge box office success, earning about $481.8 million worldwide and finishing as the second highest grossing film of 1998. It also received widespread recognition during awards season, winning numerous honors including Academy Awards, Golden Globe Awards, BAFTA Awards, and Saturn Awards, further proving its impact on both audiences and critics. Today's Saving Private Ryan is widely considered one of the greatest war movies ever made. Its groundbreaking battle scenes completely changed the way war was portrayed on screen and influenced countless war, action, and even superhero films that followed. Many famous directors have openly said that Spielberg's work on this movie inspired their own filmmaking style. The film also helped spark a renewed interest in World War II, leading to more movies, television series, documentaries, and video games based on the conflict. Even decades after its release, its influence can still be seen across the entertainment industry. In 2014, the movie was officially selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, recognizing it as a film of outstanding cultural, historical, and artistic importance. That honor confirmed its place as one of the most respected and influential films ever made. Saving Private Ryan plot summary rewritten at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial overlooking the English Channel in northern France. An elderly man named James Ryan walks slowly among the endless rows of white marble crosses and occasional stars of David, accompanied by his wife, daughter, son-in-law, young grandson, and teenage granddaughters. He stops before one particular grave, falls to his knees, and weeps. June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach, Dock Green Sector, American landing craft churned through the choppy waters of the English Channel toward the heavily fortified Normandy coast. Captain John H. Miller, Tom Hanks, leads a unit of Rangers. He quietly urges his men to clear the murder holes and check their rifles once they hit the beach. His right hand trembles uncontrollably the moment the landing ramp drops. Devastating machine gun fire erupts from German bunkers embedded in the cliffs. Soldiers are mowed down in droves. Many who leap over the sides are dragged under by their heavy gear. Miller is momentarily stunned by a nearby mortar blast. Amid the carnage, he regains his senses and orders Sergeant Mike Horvath, Tom Sizemore, to get the surviving men off the killing beach and up toward the bunkers. Using Bangalore torpedoes to blast through barbed wire and mines, the remnants of Miller's platoon fight their way forward. Private Jackson, Barry Pepper, the squad sharpshooter, takes out a deadly German machine gun nest. A flamethrower seals the bunker's fate. In the chaos, Private Caparzo Vin Diesel finds a Hitler Youth knife and gives it to Private Melish Adam Goldberg, who breaks down in tears. Horvath quietly adds a tin of France dirt to his collection of soil from previous campaigns. Among the countless fallen lies a backpack bearing the name S. Ryan. Back in Washington, D.C., rows of secretaries type out death notices. One clerk discovers that 3 Ryan brothers from Iowa have all been killed in action. Their mother will soon receive all 3 telegrams on the same day. The Army's top brass, led by General George C. Marshall Harf Presnell, learns that the 4th and youngest brother, Private James Francis Ryan of the 101st Airborne, is missing somewhere in Normandy. Moved by a letter Abraham Lincoln once wrote to a grieving mother during the Civil War, Marshall orders an immediate rescue mission, find Ryan and bring him home. Captain Miller is given the assignment. He assembles a small squad, including the reluctant translator Corporal Upham, Jeremy Davis, hot-headed Private Riben, Edward Burns, Medic Wade, Giovanni Ribisi, and the others, and sets out into the French countryside. Their search leads them through a war-torn village where they lose Caparzo to a sniper. Later, they encounter a mistaken Private Ryan, not their man, then learn their target is guarding a strategically vital bridge over the Madret River near the village of Ramel. Along the way, the squad suffers more losses. After a brutal skirmish at a radar station, Medic Wade is fatally wounded. The men nearly execute their German prisoner, nicknamed Steamboat Willie, but Upham intervenes, revealing his own pre-war life as a high school teacher and baseball coach to calm his furious men. When they finally reach Ramel, James Ryan, Matt Damon, refuses to abandon his post. "This is my unit," he says. "I'm staying." Moved by Ryan's sense of duty and the desperate defense of the bridge, Miller and his squad choose to stay and fight alongside the outnumbered paratroopers. Miller organizes a desperate last stand, They rig explosives, set up kill zones in the narrow streets, and prepare for the inevitable German counterattack. As two Tiger tanks and dozens of infantry approach, a ferocious battle erupts. Jackson is killed in the church tower. Mellish is stabbed to death in brutal hand-to-hand combat while Upham, paralyzed by fear, fails to help. Horvath dies covering the retreat. In the final moments, Miller is mortally wounded by the same German soldier he had earlier spared. As the German Tiger tank advances across the bridge, American P-51 Mustang fighters swoop in and destroy it. With his dying breath, Miller looks at Ryan and whispers, "Earn this." Decades later, the elderly James Ryan stands at Captain Miller's grave. He tells his family that he has tried every day to live a life worthy of the sacrifice made by Miller and the others. He salutes the cross and asks his wife if he has been a good man, hoping after all these years that he has earned it. Asterisk Saving Private Ryan 1998 synopsis and casting. The film opens in the present day at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial. An elderly man, James Ryan, accompanied by his family, walks through rows of white marble crosses interspersed with stars of David. He stops at a specific grave, collapses to his knees, and weeps as memories flood back. This framing device bookends the story, connecting the immense cost of war across generations. The elderly Ryan is portrayed by Harrison Young, whose quiet, dignified performance conveys decades of survivors' guilt and gratitude. The narrative shifts to June 6, 1944, D-Day. American forces assault Omaha Beach in the Dog Green sector. Landing craft slam through rough channel waters carrying men of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Captain John H. Miller, played by Tom Hanks in one of his most iconic and physically demanding roles, leads his unit. Hanks brings a compelling mix of quiet authority, weary humanity, and inner turmoil to Miller. His character is a high school teacher and baseball coach in civilian life, a detail that emerges later, humanizing the reluctant warrior who must make impossible decisions. Miller's right hand trembles from combat stress, a subtle physical tic Hanks uses to great effect throughout the film. As the ramps drop, chaos erupts. German machine guns positioned in concrete bunkers atop the cliffs unleash devastating fire. Soldiers are shredded instantly. Others drown under the weight of their packs in the surf. The beach becomes a slaughterhouse of blood, sand, and screams. Miller is briefly stunned by a mortar explosion that knocks off his helmet. He regains composure and barks orders to Sergeant Mike Horvath, portrayed by Tom Sizemore with gruff loyalty and battlefield pragmatism. Horvath serves as Miller's steadfast second-in-command and longtime friend. The sequence is unflinchingly graphic, showcasing Spielberg's commitment to realism. Men use steel obstacles for cover while medics desperately try to save the eviscerated and limbless. Miller's squad eventually pushes forward using Bangalore torpedoes to clear barbed wire and mines. They assault a bunker where Private Daniel Jackson, the squad's southern sharpshooter played by Barry Pepper, delivers a memorable long-range shot that neutralizes a key machine gun nest. Pepper's performance captures Jackson's calm precision and deep religiosity. He recites psalms while aiming, adding a layer of spiritual contrast to the brutality. After clearing the bunker with a flamethrower, the Rangers engage Germans in the trenches, creating a path inland. Private Adrian Caparso, a tough Italian-American soldier brought to life by Vin Diesel in an early standout role, finds a Hitler Youth knife and hands it to Private Stanley Fish Mellish, played by Adam Goldberg. Mellish, Jewish and visibly emotional, breaks down, highlighting the personal stakes of the fight against Nazi ideology. Goldberg infuses Mellish with nervous energy and cultural depth. Horvath collects dirt from France into a tin, adding to his collection from previous campaigns. A ritual Sizemore performs with quiet reverence. Among the dead, they notice a backpack labeled S. Ryan, foreshadowing the central mission. Back in the United States, the War Department hums with activity. Secretaries type countless condolence letters. One clerk notices 3 letters addressed to the Ryan family in Iowa. 3 brothers have been killed, 2 on D-Day beaches and 1 elsewhere. General George C. Marshall, portrayed by Harv Presnell with authoritative gravitas, learns of the situation. Moved by a letter Abraham Lincoln wrote to a mother who lost 5 sons in the Civil War, Marshall orders that Private James Francis Ryan of the 101st Airborne be found and returned home. Presnell's brief but impactful screen time lends historical weight and moral seriousness to the decision. Supporting War Department officers include Dale Dye as a colonel and Bryan Cranston in an early role as another colonel, both delivering crisp military precision. Captain Miller receives orders from Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, played by Dennis Farina, with no nonsense authority. Miller assembles a squad. He recruits Corporal Timothy E. Upham, a cartographer and translator with no combat experience, portrayed by Jeremy Davies. Davies excels at depicting Upham's initial nervousness, intellectual idealism, and moral discomfort, making him a foil to the battle-hardened veterans. The squad includes Private Richard Ribon, a wisecracking Brooklynite played by Edward Burns with street-smart cynicism and rebellious energy; Medic Irvin Wade, portrayed by Giovanni Ribisi with compassionate diligence; and the others already introduced. The squad moves through the Normandy countryside. Tensions rise as Ribon questions the mission's value, risking 8 lives for one man. Burns brings raw intensity to these confrontations. They reach a village under stalemate. A French family is caught in crossfire. The father begs them to save his daughter. Caparzo tries to help but is shot by a sniper. Jackson takes out the sniper with a precise shot through the enemy's scope. Caparzo dies and Wade retrieves a bloodstained letter the private was writing to his father. This loss deepens the squad's resentment. In the village, a wall collapses, revealing hidden Germans, leading to a tense standoff resolved by Captain Fred Hamill, Ted Danson, and his men opening fire from above. Danson brings calm leadership. They encounter another Private Ryan, Nathan Fillion, who is not their man. Fillion's brief appearance adds momentary hope and then disappointment. Hamill directs him toward a possible location for the real Ryan. The squad rests in a church. Wade rewrites Caparzo's letter. Miller and Horvath discuss losses. The men speculate on Miller's pre-war profession in a betting pool. Upham participates, hoping to win. These quieter moments allow character development. Ribon's defiance, Mellish's vulnerability, Jackson's faith, and Upham's outsider status. They reach a glider crash site. A pilot provides dog tags. Wade scolds Ribon, Mellish, and Jackson for disrespectfully searching tags in front of passing troops. Miller questions airborne soldiers and learns Ryan is guarding a bridge at Ramel. The bridge is strategically vital for Allied armor and potential German counterattacks under Rommel. Continuing, they spot a German machine gun nest near a radar installation. Despite Ribon's suggestion to bypass it, Miller orders an assault to protect following units. Upham stays back. In the firefight, Wade is mortally wounded. The squad captures a German soldier they nickname Steamboat Willie. Emotions boil over. The men want revenge, but Upham protests. Miller orders the prisoner to dig graves and later releases him, telling him to surrender to the next Allied unit. Ribon nearly deserts in disgust. Miller diffuses the situation by revealing he was a teacher and baseball coach, humanizing himself. Hanks delivers this monologue with poignant vulnerability, showing how war has changed him. The squad reaches Ramel. Private James Francis Ryan, played by Matt Damon, is defending the bridge with a small, depleted unit after their commander was killed. Damon portrays Ryan as earnest, devastated by news of his brothers, yet resolute in duty. He refuses to leave, stating his place is with his comrades. Miller's men, exhausted, ultimately decide to stay and help fortify the position. Horvath convinces Miller that this defense might be their one meaningful act. Miller assumes command and prepares defenses. They create choke points in the rubble-filled streets. Socks are stuffed with Composition B explosives to disable tank treads. Upham, now more integrated, handles ammunition runs. Jackson takes a high position in the church tower. Ribon will use a captured German motorcycle to lure enemies. As they wait, the men share moments of humanity. They listen to Edith Piaf on a gramophone, with Upham translating. Ribon recounts a story from his parents' lingerie shop. Ryan struggles to remember his brother's faces. Miller encourages him to recall a family memory involving a barn and an interrupted romantic encounter, lightening the mood briefly before solemnity returns. The German assault begins with rumbling tanks and infantry, 2 Panzer and 2 Tiger I tanks plus dozens of troops. Jackson signals from the tower. Mines and gunfire thin the enemy. Explosives disable 1 Tiger. Intense street fighting ensues. Positions shift constantly. Jackson is killed by tank fire in a devastating loss. Mellish is trapped in a building and killed in brutal hand-to-hand combat by a German soldier using a bayonet. Upham, frozen nearby, fails to intervene. A moment Davies portrays with shattering psychological realism. Rayburn flanks and destroys a flak cannon. Horvath is wounded but continues fighting before being fatally shot. Miller is hit while trying to detonate the bridge. The same German prisoner from earlier shoots him. As Miller lies dying, he fires his .45 at an advancing Tiger. American P-51 Mustangs arrive, destroying the tank and turning the tide. Reiben and Ryan reach Miller. Upham, on the other side, captures the remaining Germans, including the shooter, and executes the man who killed Miller in cold retribution before releasing the others. Miller's final words to Ryan are, "Earn this." The scene transitions back to the present, where the elderly Ryan stands at Miller's grave, reflecting on a life lived in honor of that sacrifice. He asks his wife if he has been a good man. Deep dive into casting choices and performances. Tom Hanks as Captain John Miller anchors the film. Spielberg cast Hanks for his everyman quality and ability to convey moral complexity. Miller's leadership is not bombastic but thoughtful and burdened. Hanks underwent boot camp training with the cast, except Damon, to build authenticity and squad cohesion. His trembling hand and quiet moments of doubt humanize the hero. Tom Sizemore's Sergeant Horvath provides ballast. Sizemore's tough exterior and underlying loyalty make Horvath the squad's emotional core. Their friendship feels lived in, essential for the film's themes of brotherhood. Edward Burns as Reiben brings authentic New York edge. As a relatively new actor at the time, Burns infused Reiben with skepticism that challenges the mission, representing the audience's potential doubts. His confrontations with Miller crackle with tension. Barry Pepper's Jackson stands out for his intensity and marksmanship scenes. Pepper trained extensively with rifles to portray the sniper convincingly. His psalm reciting adds a memorable spiritual dimension. Adam Goldberg's Mellish explores Jewish identity and fear amid combat. His breakdown with the Hitler Youth knife and death scene are among the film's most harrowing. Vin Diesel's Caparzo, though limited in screen time, made an impact. It was one of his first major roles, showcasing physical presence and subtle empathy in the French family scene. Giovanni Ribisi as Medic Wade brings gentleness and competence. His death and the letter-writing scenes underscore the loss of humanity in war. Jeremy Davis Upham is perhaps the most transformative arc. Davis portrays the transition from timid intellectual to vengeful soldier with nuance. His inaction during Melish's death and later execution of the German explore cowardice, morality, and the corrupting nature of war. Matt Damon as Private Ryan was a deliberate choice for relative unknown status. Pre-Good Will Hunting fame explosion. Spielberg wanted Ryan to feel like just another soldier. Damon was kept out of boot camp to maintain squad resentment. His performance balances grief, duty, and resolve. Harrison Young as Old Ryan delivers the emotional payoff with minimal dialogue but profound presence. Supporting players elevate every scene. Ted Danson's Captain Hamill provides momentary relief and direction. Dennis Farina's Anderson issues orders with crisp authority. Paul Giamatti appears briefly as Sergeant Hill. Bryan Cranston, Harv Presnell, and others in the War Department scenes add bureaucratic weight. The German actors, particularly the Steamboat Willie performer, add complexity to enemy portrayals, avoiding caricatures. The ensemble casting emphasized realism. Many actors, including Hanks, Sizemore, Burns, Pepper, Goldberg, Ribisi, and Davies, endured a rigorous boot camp under technical advisor Dale Dye. This forged genuine camaraderie visible on screen. Spielberg sought actors who could embody ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances, avoiding Hollywood glamour. The result is a cast that feels like a real World War II unit, diverse in background, flawed, brave, and deeply human. Asterisk. Expanding the synopsis, key sequences and themes. The Omaha Beach landing, lasting nearly 25 minutes, is a masterpiece of sound design, editing, and practical effects. No music plays during the initial assault, heightening the documentary-like horror. Bullet impacts on water, screams, and explosion create an immersive nightmare. Miller's disorientation after the mortar blast mirrors the audience's shock. This sequence sets the tone for the film's unflinching depiction of combat. The search through Normandy allows character moments that deepen investment. The sniper sequence builds tension masterfully, with Jackson's counter shot providing catharsis. The mistaken Ryan encounter adds dark humor and frustration. The radar station battle marks a turning point, with Wade's death hitting hard due to Ribisi's likable performance. The prisoner debate raises ethical questions central to the film. Rules of war versus raw vengeance. Rammel's defense is the climax. Spielberg choreographs the battle with tactical clarity, choke points, elevated positions, improvised explosives, while maintaining emotional stakes. Jackson's death in the tower, Melish's brutal stabbing, intercut with Upham's paralysis, and Horvath's final stand are visceral. The P-51 intervention provides triumphant relief after relentless tension. Miller's death and final command to Ryan encapsulate the film's message about the value of individual lives and the debt owed to the fallen. Throughout, the cast's chemistry sells the bonds and fractures within the squad. Rybin's near desertion, Upham's growth, and Ryan's refusal create dramatic friction resolved through shared sacrifice. Spielberg's direction draws powerhouse performances that make the lengthy runtime feel intimate despite epic scope. The film's technical achievements. Janusz Kaminski's cinematography with desaturated colors and shaky cam, the sound design, and John Williams' restrained score support the actors perfectly, but it is the human element embodied by this exceptional ensemble that resonates most deeply. Each performer contributes to a collective portrait of courage, loss, and the search for meaning in vast chaos, production development, and pre-production. The story of how Saving Private Ryan came to exist begins not with Steven Spielberg, but with producer Mark Gordon, who had long admired the work of screenwriter Robert Rodat on earlier family-oriented films. The two met in early 1995 to talk through potential projects, and within a matter of weeks, Rodat had conceived the premise that would become Saving Private Ryan. The spark for the idea came from a gift Rodat's wife had given him, a history book about the D-Day invasion that recounted in granular detail the events of June 6, 1944. Rodat was also affected by a visit to a war memorial in Keene, New Hampshire, where he noticed that several of the names listed as killed in action shared the same surname, evidence of multiple brothers from a single family lost to the war. He later reflected that losing one son to war was already an almost unbearable idea, and that losing more than one seemed nearly impossible to comprehend. This observation about family loss became the emotional core of the script, and the fictional Ryan family was modeled largely on the real-life Nyland brothers, four siblings who served during the war. Two were killed, a third was presumed dead, and the fourth was pulled from combat and sent home. To get the project off the ground, Gordon partnered with producer Gary Levinson to establish an independent production company, Mutual Film Company, specifically to develop the film. Gordon then took Rodat's draft to executives at Paramount Pictures, who responded favorably and formally hired Rodat to continue developing the screenplay, a process that stretched on for roughly a year. Before Spielberg's involvement, Michael Bay was attached to direct, but he eventually exited the project, reportedly because he struggled to find the right creative approach to the material. The script found its way to Tom Hanks through Karin Sage, a junior agent at Creative Artists Agency who represented him. Hanks was drawn to it immediately and met with Gordon and Levinson to discuss it further. Hanks then passed the script along to Spielberg, and the director agreed to take on the project, partly because the two men had wanted to collaborate for years. Rodat worried that Paramount might shelve his script once the studio also acquired two rival World War II era scripts that had well-known action stars attached, Bruce Willis for one and Arnold Schwarzenegger for the other. However, once Hanks and Spielberg were confirmed as attached to Saving Private Ryan, Gordon was able to convince Paramount executives that their project deserved priority given the sheer star power involved. Spielberg later explained what drew him to the story: the idea of sending a group of soldiers, each with parents and families of their own, on a mission to save one young man and return him to his mother, despite the very real possibility that any of them could die along the way, was what made the narrative compelling to him. This tension between an ostensibly noble goal and the moral cost required to achieve it became the through line of the entire film. Spielberg's connection to the material was also deeply personal. He had a lifelong preoccupation with World War II, partly because conversations about the Holocaust and combat had dominated discussions in his childhood home. His father was a veteran who had hosted many other veterans at the family's house, feeding a fascination in the young Spielberg that combined his father's own recollections with the influence of countless Dollywood Wadu films he grew up watching. Spielberg later described the finished film as, in some sense, a tribute to his father. With Spielberg attached, DreamWorks Pictures, the studio he had co-founded, stepped in as a financing partner while his own production company, Amblin Entertainment, came aboard as well. Spielberg's stature on the project effectively displaced Gordon and Levinson from any real creative or financial stake. They retained producing credits and received a one-time payment but had no further equity or decision-making role. Levinson later acknowledged with resignation that once a filmmaker of Spielberg's caliber signs on, it's understood that the original producers won't be making decisions on set. DreamWorks brought in Ian Bryce to take over producing duties in their place. The question of how the film would be distributed was settled in an unusually informal way. In April 1997, Sumner Redstone, chairman of Viacom, Paramount's parent company, had Spielberg flip a coin to decide who would hold which distribution rights. Spielberg won the toss, securing the more valuable North American distribution rights for DreamWorks, while Paramount retained international rights. Profits were pooled and divided evenly between the two studios regardless of the coin flip's outcome. As part of the broader arrangement, Paramount received North American distribution rights to DreamWorks' Deep Impact, released this same year. To help keep production costs manageable, both Spielberg and Hanks agreed to take reduced upfront salaries in exchange for a combined 17.5% stake in the film's gross profits, effectively 35 cents of every dollar the film earned. Spielberg's earliest conception of the project looked very different from the finished film. He initially envisioned something closer to a boy's adventure story, in which the mission to find Ryan was essentially a public relations exercise dreamed up by the War Department. After conducting extensive interviews with World War II veterans during his research, however, he abandoned that framing as inappropriate to the subject matter. Instead, he chose to ground the story in a realistic depiction of the historical events while foregrounding the uncomfortable moral calculus of risking several lives to save one. He recalled that numerous veterans had approached him during his research and pleaded with him not to make another sanitized Hollywood war picture, but to tell their stories honestly. In shaping the narrative, Spielberg drew on interviews with surviving members of the Neeland family and looked to other historical instances of families losing multiple sons in wartime, including the 5 Sullivan brothers who died during World War II and the Bixby brothers who were killed during the American Civil War, the latter connected to the famous condolence letter attributed to Abraham Lincoln, portions of which appear in the finished film. Spielberg was openly critical of earlier Hollywood war films, describing them as sanitized and overly sentimental, more interested in honor and the glory of service than in any honest depiction of combat, an approach he considered comfortable but fundamentally dishonest. He wanted instead to capture the raw terror soldiers experienced in battle. He recounted one veteran's description of the chaos of the beach landing, how the entire experience blurred together in memory except for the smallest, most vivid sensory details, like the grains of sand pressed against his face, the concussive rattle of exploding shells, and the disorientation caused by the constant bombardment. Historian Stephen Ambrose, who had written extensively on the Normandy landings, served as a historical consultant on the film. Ambrose was known for rejecting romanticized portrayals of the invasion that glossed over the grim reality of wounded men dying slowly in the mud and surf, often crying out in pain for their mothers or for morphine. Spielberg believed that the cultural legacy of the Vietnam War had made his generation of filmmakers less inclined to glorify combat on screen than earlier generations had been. Even so, he acknowledged the influence of several earlier war films on his approach, including Battleground 1949, The Steel Helmet 1951, and Hell is for Heroes 1962. Although Rodard's screenplay was close to what Spielberg considered an ideal World War II script, the director still felt it had some shortcomings. He brought in Frank Darabont and Scott Frank to perform uncredited rewrites. Darabont is credited with suggesting that the Omaha Beach sequence begin partway through the invasion, with the protagonists arriving as part of a second wave of troops rather than landing on an empty beach, a choice meant to thrust the audience directly into the chaos of an already raging battle. Scott Frank, for his part, worked from transcriptions of Spielberg's own recorded story ideas along with two folders of historical research on the landings. Frank found it challenging to translate such dense historical material into workable dramatic scenes, but the material nonetheless shaped his revisions. The film's cemetery bookend sequence, in which an elderly Ryan visits Miller's grave, was inspired by an experience from Spielberg's own youth. While visiting the Normandy region as a young man, he witnessed a family accompanying an older man who broke down in tears upon reaching a specific grave marker, an image that stayed with him and eventually found its way into the film. Casting decisions were driven by Spielberg's belief that older actors would better convey the physical and psychological toll of combat than younger performers might, since real soldiers tend to look prematurely aged under the stresses of war. Captain Miller was conceived as the story's steady adult center, a figure meant to project calm and safety to his men, a stability that is subtly undercut by his uncontrollable hand tremors. Spielberg wanted Hanks specifically because he considered him the only actor he could picture in the role who would not, in a moment of crisis, instinctively try to use his teeth to pull the pin from a grenade, his way of describing Hanks's everyman credibility rather than reckless bravado. Hanks built his interpretation of the character around research into the real history of the 2nd Ranger Battalion prior to Omaha Beach, coming to believe that Miller was above all terrified of losing more of his men. Both Mel Gibson and Harrison Ford had reportedly been considered for the role before Hanks was cast. The ensemble surrounding Miller was deliberately diverse, a group that includes a Jewish soldier and an Italian American soldier, echoing the makeup of squad seen in earlier World War II films. Spielberg later said this wasn't a conscious homage on his part, but he suspected he had unintentionally absorbed the conventions of older war movies. Edward Burns, cast as Ryben, initially played the character as a scripted wise guy type, but the experience of filming the brutal Omaha Beach sequence pushed him to give the role a rougher, harder edge than originally written. Tom Sizemore, who took the role of Horvath, Miller's close friend and second-in-command, had reportedly also been offered a part in the rival World War II film The Thin Red Line, released the same year but chose Spielberg's project instead. Sizemore had a documented history of substance abuse, and Spielberg required him to pass regular drug tests throughout production in order to keep the role, with the threat that he would be recast and his scenes reshot with someone else if he failed. Sizemore described his character as a quiet, dutiful soldier deeply loyal to his captain, whose fatal flaw was an inability to recognize when he had reached his limit. Vin Diesel was cast as Caparzo after Spielberg saw two low-budget films Diesel had written, directed, and starred in himself. At the time, Diesel was working as a telemarketer and had struggled to find acting work. Adam Goldberg's character, Mellish, did not exist in the original screenplay at all and was created specifically once Goldberg was cast. For the pivotal role of Private Ryan, Spielberg wanted a relatively unknown face. He ended up meeting Matt Damon after visiting the set of Good Will Hunting, where Robin Williams introduced the two. Spielberg cast Damon shortly afterward, drawn to what he described as a distinctly wholesome, everyday American look, without realizing that the imminent success of Good Will Hunting would soon make Damon a much bigger star than anticipated. Neil Patrick Harris was reportedly considered for the role of Ryan, and Edward Norton is said to have turned it down in order to appear in American History X, also released in 1998. Several other actors, including Thomas Hadenchurch, Pete Postlethwaite, Tony Shalhoub, and even country singer Garth Brooks, were considered for unspecified roles in the film. At the suggestion of Hanks and technical advisor Dale Dye, a retired Marine who would go on to appear in the film as a War Department colonel, Spielberg had his principal cast undergo a demanding 6-day boot camp intended to simulate, in compressed form, the physical hardship of military training. Under the supervision of Dye and several retired Marines, the actors remained in character throughout, running 5 miles with full packs, practicing weapons handling, executing mock combat drills, doing push ups as punishment for mistakes, and surviving on only a few hours of sleep each night in cold, wet conditions. Several of the actors reportedly wanted to abandon the exercise partway through, but Hanks urged them to see it through, arguing that quitting would leave them with regrets and that completing the training would deepen their understanding of the characters and their motivations. Diesel later recalled that the cast's respect for Hanks grew enormously in that moment, watching a bona fide movie star, someone who had no obligation to endure any of it, choose to stay when everyone else wanted to leave. Dye remained on set throughout the shoot to help keep the actors grounded in their training. Notably, Spielberg deliberately excluded Damon from the boot camp altogether, wanting the rest of the cast to carry a genuine undercurrent of resentment toward Ryan and, by extension, toward Damon himself. Released theatrical the summer 1998 movie season had gotten underway in early May with the release of Deep Impact, a film that performed better than expected and gave studios some optimism heading into a crowded slate of roughly 100 planned releases for the season. Godzilla and Armageddon were widely expected to be the summer's biggest blockbusters, while studio executives held out hope that a handful of smaller budget films, including Small Soldiers, The Negotiator, The Parent Trap, and There's Something About Mary, might break out as sleeper hits. Compared to previous summers, the 1998 slate featured fewer sequels and less purely escapist fare, with more films aimed at adult audiences. Saving Private Ryan was highly anticipated heading into its release, though some industry analysis suggested its commercial prospects might be limited by its lengthy runtime, which restricted how many times theaters could screen it in a single day, as well as by its graphic, violent content. DreamWorks' head of marketing, Terry Press, acknowledged the inherent risk of releasing a serious, somber war drama during the summer months, a period typically reserved for lighter escapist entertainment, but felt this risk was offset by the enormous popularity of both Spielberg and Hanks. An early screening held for DreamWorks and Paramount executives reportedly received an extremely positive response, though Spielberg himself claimed he had low expectations for the film's commercial performance, believing its unflinching violence would limit its appeal to a broad mainstream audience. Saving Private Ryan held its premiere on July 21, 1998. Unlike many high-profile studio premieres, the event was deliberately low-key, without an accompanying party or a large celebrity turnout. Press remarked that a more festive celebratory premiere would have felt inappropriate given the film's subject matter. The film then opened wide across the United States and Canada on July 24, 1998. During its opening weekend, it grossed $30.6 million across 2,463 theaters, averaging roughly $12,414 per screen. That total was enough to make it the number one film in the country that weekend, ahead of The Mask of Zorro in its second weekend, Lethal Weapon 4 in its third weekend, and There's Something About Mary also in its second weekend. The audience that turned out was split evenly between men and women and skewed toward viewers over the age of 25. Commentators at the time noted it was unusual for such a long drama, running nearly 3 hours, to perform so strongly right out of the gate, crediting the film's overwhelmingly positive reviews. DreamWorks executives believe the opening weekend total might have been even higher had it not been for a delay in film prints reaching a number of theaters across California and Arizona until later in the day. The film held on to the number one position in its second weekend, earning an additional $23.6 million ahead of the debuting The Parent Trap and the third weekend run of There's Something About Mary. It remained in first place for a third consecutive weekend, earning $17.4 million, ahead of the debuts of Snake Eyes and Halloween H20, 20 years later, and again topped the charts in its fourth weekend with $13.2 million, ahead of the openings of How Stella Got Her Groove Back and The Avengers. By its fifth weekend, the film slipped to the number 2 position, earning $10.1 million behind the debut of Blade. Although it never reclaimed the top spot after that point, Saving Private Ryan remained in the domestic top 10 for a full 12 weeks. By the conclusion of its theatrical run, the film had earned a total domestic gross of $216.5 million, making it the highest grossing release of 1998 in North America, ahead of both Armageddon and There's Something About Mary. This also made it only the third R-rated film in history to cross the $200 million domestic mark, following Beverly Hills Cop in 1984 and Terminator 2 Judgment Day in 1991. Outside the United States and Canada, the film added an estimated further $265.3 million, bringing its cumulative worldwide total to $481. 8 million, and making it the second highest grossing film of 1998 globally, trailing only Armageddon. In retrospective coverage, Saving Private Ryan was frequently cited as the single biggest success story of that summer's theatrical season. Commentary at the time framed the strong box office performance of a serious, prestige drama during a summer otherwise dominated by blockbuster spectacle as evidence that mainstream audiences were still receptive to serious storytelling alongside popcorn entertainment like Armageddon and Godzilla, or broad comedies like There's Something About Mary. Some coverage suggested that part of the film's popular appeal lay in its depiction of what was portrayed as a nobler, more clear-cut one associated with straightforward values of heroism and patriotic duty. The overall 1998 box office went on to set new records, crossing $7 billion in total earnings for the year. Notably, several of the year's biggest hits, including Saving Private Ryan, There's Something About Mary, Rush Hour, and The Waterboy, had comparatively modest budgets, while some of the year's most heavily hyped blockbusters, such as Godzilla and Armageddon, proved so expensive to produce that they ultimately generated less profit relative to their cost. Subsequent theatrical re-releases have pushed the film's cumulative worldwide box office total up to $482.3 million, thanks to their profit-sharing arrangement. Spielberg and Hanks are each estimated to have personally earned somewhere between $30 million and $40 million from the film's box office performance. Home media Saving Private Ryan made its home video debut on VHS in May 1999. It quickly became the most successful rental title of its era, earning $9.6 million in rental income during its very first week and climbing to roughly $44 million in total rental revenue by July 1999. A limited edition 2-tape VHS package followed in November 1999, which added a making-of documentary along with a recorded message from Spielberg discussing D-Day and the National D-Day Museum. A DVD edition was released alongside that limited VHS set, carrying the same bonus features. A more substantial 2-disc special collector's edition DVD followed in May 2004, timed to coincide with the 60th anniversary of the D-Day landings. This expanded edition included additional behind-the-scenes material recorded during the original production, featuring Spielberg discussing his personal connection to World War II history, the influence of the Nealon brothers' story, the development of the film's story and characters, the cast's grueling boot camp experience, the involvement of the Irish Army and the various filming locations, the elaborate recreation of Omaha Beach, and the film's music and sound design, along with a closing farewell message from the director. Alongside this collector's edition, a separate 4-disc deluxe package titled The World War II Collection was also released, bundling in a collectible book and 2 additional documentaries. Price for Peace, directed by James Small, which examined the use of military dogs during the war, and Shooting War, directed by Richard Schickel, which focused on wartime combat photographers and featured narration by Hanks. The film arrived on Blu-ray as a 2-disc set in May 2010, carrying over all of the previously released bonus material with the exception of Price for Peace. Paramount Home Entertainment subsequently issued a recall of some of these Blu-ray discs after discovering an audio synchronization defect in certain copies. The issue was corrected in discs re-released later that same month. To mark the film's 20th anniversary in 2018, a 3-disc commemorative 20th anniversary Blu-ray package was released, which included a 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray disc along with all of the special features that had accumulated across earlier home video editions. Beyond Home Video, a novelization of the film, co-written by Max Allan Collins and Robert Rodat, was published to coincide with the theatrical release. A separate companion book titled Saving Private Ryan, The Men, The Mission, The Movie, a film by Steven Spielberg, was also published in 1998, featuring illustrations Color photographic plates, excerpts from the screenplay and from Ambrose's historical writing, along with commentary from members of the cast and crew, including Spielberg, Hanks, and Damon. Reception box office as detailed above. Saving Private Ryan proved to be an enormous commercial success relative to expectations, particularly given industry concerns going in about its long runtime and graphic content limiting its audience. It opened at number 1 with a $30. 6 million weekend and went on to hold the top spot for 4 consecutive weekends before slipping to second place in its fifth week, ultimately spending 12 total weeks in the domestic top 10, its eventual $216. 5 million domestic total made it the top grossing film released in North America during 1998, ahead of both Armageddon and There's Something About Mary, and made it just the third R-rated film ever to surpass $200 million domestically. Its worldwide total of $481.8 million, later reported as $482.3 million following subsequent re-releases, placed it as the second highest grossing film globally for the year, trailing only Armageddon. Notably, its financial success came without the enormous production budget associated with several of the year's biggest, most heavily marketed blockbusters, underscoring how comparatively efficient the production had been relative to its box office returns. Critical response Saving Private Ryan was met with overwhelmingly positive reviews upon its release, and audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on the service's I to F scale. Critics were broadly aligned in praising the film for portraying the brutal, unglamorous reality of what has often been described as the good war, with a level of unflinching honesty rarely seen in earlier American cinema. Writing in the Los Angeles Times, critic Kenneth Turan described the film as considerably darker and more pessimistic than any of Spielberg's previous work, arguing that it dismantled the traditional mythology of World War II as a straightforward contest between virtuous heroes and clearly evil villains, instead depicting a version of combat where morally decent actions are frequently fatal and death itself feels arbitrary and senseless. Some critics argued that this refusal to romanticize the fighting asked audiences to reckon with the idea that the lives lost in the war carried just as much weight as the lives that were ultimately saved. In the Chicago Tribune, critic Gene Siskel praised the film's ability to depict the chaos and brutality of war, honestly, while still finding a believable way to honor the courage and sacrifice of the men fighting it. Writing for Salon.com, critic Gary Kamiya suggested the film would permanently reshape how audiences pictured one of the defining events of the 20th century, calling that an achievement of real significance. In the New York Times, critic Stephen Holden predicted the film, despite what he considered some flaws, would eventually be remembered as a genuine classic. A large portion of critical commentary focused specifically on the film's two major combat set pieces, and above all on its opening Omaha Beach sequence. Critics, including Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly and Richard Schickel of Time, described the violence in that sequence, variously characterized as horrifying, visceral, brutal, and shocking, as one of the most groundbreaking passages ever committed to film. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times and Schickel both drew comparisons to similarly intense battle sequences in the Vietnam War film Platoon, though they noted that Saving Private Ryan operated on a far larger scale, depicting masses of soldiers being killed from a distance and sustaining a prolonged, deliberately unrelenting sense of horror without ever allowing the audience to grow numb to it. Some reviewers felt the Omaha Beach sequence was so powerful and thought-provoking on its own that it somewhat overshadowed the rest of the film that followed. Although some critics took issue with the extremity of the violence and gore on display, Turan argued that Spielberg's approach was deliberate and dispassionate rather than gratuitous, meant to convey the genuine chaos and despair experienced by the soldiers rather than to entertain. Spielberg himself pushed back firmly against any suggestion that the violence was exploitative, insisting that he wanted audiences to genuinely understand what combat felt like from the inside rather than simply observe it as distant spectators. A number of critics also felt that the film's climactic battle sequence in Ramel was, if anything, even more brutal than the Omaha Beach opening, pointing in particular to the drawn-out, agonizing death of Mellish as he is stabbed through the chest. Writing for the New York Observer, Critic Andrew Saris was more critical of this violence, characterizing the depiction of severed limbs and copious bloodshed in harsher, more disapproving terms. Beyond the battle sequences, critics Turan and Jonathan Rosenbaum both felt that the film's quieter, more conventional dramatic scenes were competently handled but somewhat unoriginal, drawing noticeable influence from earlier war filmmakers such as Oliver Stone, Stanley Kubrick, and Francis Ford Coppola. Other critics singled out what they viewed as overly sentimental or manipulative moments, particularly the modern day framing device involving the elderly Ryan visiting the cemetery. Even so, Kamiya described that same framing sequence as deeply moving, calling it a fragile but necessary form of redemption for everything the character had witnessed. Hanks's central performance was widely praised, with several critics calling it among the finest work of his career up to that point. Many reviewers felt his familiar, everyman screen persona allowed him to bring a mixture of weariness, empathy, and vulnerability to Miller, layered beneath an outward appearance of strength, decency, and quiet cynicism about the war itself. Both Ebert and Schickel wrote that Hanks conveyed a kind of understated authority that hinted at unspoken competence, the exact quality needed to make it believable that his men, and by extension the audience, would follow him into such dangerous circumstances. Turan felt that Hanks's performance modeled how audiences might hope they themselves would behave if placed in similarly harrowing situations. The rest of the ensemble also received largely favorable notices, with Jeremy Davis's performance singled out by several critics, including Ebert, who felt that Upham's arc from inexperienced interpreter to hardened participant in violence represented the culmination of Spielberg's underlying argument about the corrosive nature of war. Critics Kliberman and Turan also highlighted strong supporting turns from Barry Pepper, Giovanni Ribisi, and Tom Sizemore, with Turan specifically calling Sizemore's work in the film the most disciplined and accomplished performance of his career to that point. Ebert praised the ensemble more broadly for avoiding the kind of broad, cliche-driven characterizations common in earlier war films, crediting the cast with making the bonds between the soldiers feel genuine. Not every performance was praised equally, however. Kamiya felt Damon's performance came across as somewhat jarring, criticizing both his more polished screen presence and his monologue about his brothers as feeling artificial, and arguing that this weakness made the character of Ryan less compelling and, by extension, made it harder for audiences to feel emotionally invested in the mission to save him. Saving Private Ryan went on to earn a substantial haul of major industry awards. At the 56th Golden Globe Awards in early 1999, it won Best Drama and Best Director for Spielberg, while also picking up nominations for Best Drama Actor for Hanks, Best Original Score for Williams, and Best Screenplay for Roda. At the 71st Academy Awards, the film won 5 Oscars: Best Director for Spielberg, Best Cinematography for Kaminsky, Best Film Editing for Khan, Best Sound and Best Sound Effects Editing, while also earning nominations in categories including Best Actor for Hanks, Best Original Screenplay for Rodart, Best Original Score for Williams, Best Production Design, and Best Makeup. The film's loss in the Best Picture category to Shakespeare in Love is widely regarded as one of the more surprising upsets in Academy Awards history, and it led some DreamWorks executives to accuse Miramax, the producer behind Shakespeare in Love, of running an unusually aggressive award season campaign. A 2015 survey of Academy voters found that, given the chance to vote again with the benefit of hindsight, many would have chosen Saving Private Ryan for Best Picture instead. At the 52nd British Academy Film Awards, the film won Best Special Visual Effects and Best Sound, and picked up further nominations for Best Film, Best Direction for Spielberg, and Best Actor for Hanks. At the 25th Saturn Awards, it won the award for Best Action, Adventure, or Thriller Film. The third Golden Satellite Awards recognized the film with a win for Best Editing for Khan, along with a nomination for Best Supporting Actor for Sizemore, while the Empire Awards honored Spielberg and Hanks with wins for Best Director and Best Actor respectively. The film also picked up a range of additional honors, including Outstanding Directorial Achievement from the Directors Guild of America for Spielberg, Motion Picture Producer of the Year at the PGA Awards, a Best Casting honor from the Casting Society of America, a Grammy Award for Best Instrumental Composition written for a motion picture for Williams' score, and multiple prizes from the Motion Picture Sound Editors Organization for both dialogue and sound effects editing. In 2014, the Library of Congress selected Saving Private Ryan for preservation in the United States National Film Registry, recognizing it as a work of significant cultural, historical, or aesthetic value. Discussions of the film's historical accuracy tended to focus heavily on the Omaha Beach sequence, which several publications praised for its fidelity down to the specific sounds of gunfire, though some inaccuracies were also noted, such as the depiction of bullets killing soldiers underwater, the absence of the British coxswains who actually steered many of the landing craft, and a battle duration considerably shorter on screen than in reality. Historical curator John Delaney offered a more measured assessment, noting that while the sequence accurately depicted conditions for one specific unit at one particular section of the beach on that day, it would be inaccurate to treat it as fully representative of the entire Omaha Beach operation, since conditions varied dramatically across its roughly 3.5-mile length. Historian Stephen Ambrose, who consulted on the film, acknowledged that the core premise of sending 8 soldiers to retrieve a single missing man was something of a historical stretch, though he noted that locating any specific paratrooper amid the widespread scattering of airborne troops during the invasion would genuinely have been very difficult. Many World War II veterans singled out the film's opening battle as the single most realistic depiction of combat they had ever encountered on screen. One veteran, interviewed by Time magazine, recalled walking out of the theater afterward into complete stunned silence, with nobody in the audience saying a word, overwhelmed by memories the film had brought rushing back. There were numerous reports of veterans who found themselves unable to finish watching the film because of the traumatic memories it triggered. In response, the United States Department of Veterans Affairs set up a dedicated phone line for viewers affected by the film's content, and reports indicated an increase in veterans seeking counseling for post-traumatic stress disorder following its release. Pre-production time was unusually compressed because Spielberg had chosen to direct Amistad immediately after wrapping the Lost World, Jurassic Park, leaving less runway before Saving Private Ryan needed to begin filming. Cinematographer Janusz Kaminski spent several weeks conducting camera tests to establish the visual language of the film. He and Spielberg briefly considered shooting in black and white, as Spielberg had done with Schindler's List, but ultimately rejected the idea as feeling too self-consciously prestigious. Instead, they aimed to emulate the look of surviving color newsreel footage from the war itself. Kaminski's process for settling on a visual style involved letting the demands of the narrative guide his lighting choices, while also identifying stylistic approaches from other films that he specifically wanted to avoid. Both men drew visual inspiration from wartime documentary footage, including Memphis Belle, A Story of a Flying Fortress, The Battle of Midway, the Why We Fight series, and even Nazi propaganda films directed by Leni Riefenstahl, as well as historical photographs of the Omaha Beach landings taken by war photographer Robert Capa. Kaminski wanted the finished picture to carry the texture of something shot on cheap 16mm stock by embedded combat cameramen rather than a big-budget studio production. To achieve this rough, documentary-like aesthetic, the filmmaker employed a range of unconventional camera techniques. Kaminski stripped the protective coating from certain camera lenses to produce a flatter, more degraded image reminiscent of period cameras, and deliberately mismatched lenses across multiple cameras to create visual inconsistency between shots. He also varied shutter angles and speeds and desynchronized the camera shutter to create a distinctive streaking effect during motion, a technique he considered risky since any failure couldn't be corrected afterward in post-production. A specialized camera shaking rig was used to simulate the physical jolt of a nearby explosion or a passing tank. Spielberg also opted to shoot in the relatively boxy 1:8:5:1 aspect ratio rather than a wider format, believing it more closely approximated natural human vision and finding widescreen compositions comparatively artificial. Finding a suitable filming location for the Normandy coastal sequences took roughly 3 months of scouting. The real Omaha Beach had been developed too extensively over the decades to serve as a workable location, and many other French beaches were off limits due to either military use or environmental protections. Spielberg suspected that French officials were also simply reluctant to have him filming there. Beaches in England and Scotland were considered but ultimately rejected for lacking either the right visual character or adequate nearby infrastructure, such as housing for a large crew, and for failing to offer the specific water depth the production needed for actors to leap from landing craft. Associate producer Kevin Delanoy, who had worked on Braveheart in Ireland, had existing relationships with the Irish army and knowledge of the country's coastline, which ultimately led the production to Carraclough Beach near Carraclough in County Wexford, an 11-kilometer stretch of coastline with the golden sand and dramatic cliffs the filmmakers wanted, along with practical amenities nearby. Spielberg ultimately selected a roughly 1-kilometer segment of that beach known as Balinisker. He later admitted some disappointment that the chosen beach wasn't as wide as the actual Omaha Beach, noting that he compensated by using wide-angle lenses to visually extend the sandy flats before the shingle, while relying on tighter lenses elsewhere to compress the sense of action. A separate stretch of coastline near Blackwater, also in County Wexford, had been considered as an alternative, but a group of local nuns who owned the land could not make it available in time. Extensive infrastructure work went into preparing Balinisker, including the construction of service roads to allow vehicle access. Production designer Thomas E. Sanders oversaw the building of concrete gun emplacements, bunkers, check hedgehogs, and barbed wire defenses, much of it fabricated by local metal workers. Preparing the beach for filming took more than 11 weeks in total, and a storm shortly before shooting began destroyed some of the built props, forcing the crew to rebuild overnight. The main production crew arrived on location on June 25, 1997, with principal photography beginning 2 days later on June 27. Filming moved at a demanding pace, at times completing as many as 50 separate shots in a single day. Spielberg wanted his actors kept perpetually off balance during the shoot, later explaining that he intentionally worked faster than usual to avoid giving them time to settle into a comfortable, novel reading kind of routine. He wanted them to feel at every moment as though they were still in the middle of combat, since real war affords no such breaks. The film was shot almost entirely in chronological continuity, a choice some crew members found emotionally taxing, since the ensemble that began the shoot together gradually thinned out as characters were killed off over the course of production. Filming the Omaha Beach sequence, the film's most demanding set piece, took roughly 3 to 4 weeks to shoot and cost approximately $12 million on its own. The scene ultimately involved around 1,500 people, including 400 crew members, 1,000 volunteer Irish Army reservists, and dozens of additional extras, along with roughly 30 amputee and paraplegic performers fitted with prosthetic limbs to portray grievously wounded soldiers. Their numbers were further bolstered by more than 1,000 detailed mannequins standing in for background casualties. To manage such an enormous cast of extras, they were organized into platoons, each with a designated leader, allowing Dale Dye to coordinate the action across 4 separate radio channels with the assistance of 3 non-commissioned officers. Costume designer Joanna Johnston commissioned an American manufacturer that had historically supplied combat boots to World War II soldiers to produce roughly 2,000 pairs for the production, reportedly using the last remaining batch of period-accurate dye. Soldiers wading through the ocean wore wetsuits underneath their uniforms to guard against hypothermia in the cold Irish waters, and an armorer was brought in to supply historically accurate weaponry throughout the shoot. 2 actual Higgins boats used during historical amphibious landings were incorporated into the beach sequence, supplemented by additional vintage landing craft sourced from California, Donegal, and Southampton. Hanks later described the visceral shock of filming the first day on the landing craft, recalling how the ramp dropped and he watched the front rows of soldiers appear to be blown apart in an instant. Despite knowing intellectually that it was all special effects, he found the tactile intensity of the moment, the pink mist in the air, the deafening noise, debris raining down, genuinely horrifying to experience in the moment. The effect of soldiers vomiting from seasickness aboard the boats was achieved using milk of magnesia rather than any digital or prosthetic trick. One particularly technical shot, a crane movement rising from beneath the ocean surface up above the battlefield, was accomplished by mounting the camera crane on a flatbed trailer and reversing the entire rig into the sea. The Omaha Beach sequence was elaborately choreographed by stunt coordinator Simon Crane, with pyrotechnics and explosive effects overseen by Neil Corbold. Remarkably, the only serious injury during the sequence's filming was an extra whose foot was accidentally run over by a vehicle. Thousands of gallons of fake blood were used throughout the sequence, much of it employed simply to redden the surrounding ocean water and shoreline. Drawing on his interviews with veterans, Spielberg had dead fish scattered across the sand and water, and even had a floating Bible placed in the surf as a small but pointed visual detail. Bullet impacts striking the sand and water were simulated using concealed air pipes buried beneath the surface, while burning barrels of diesel fuel produced thick black smoke, and a fleet of pickup trucks equipped with dispersal systems generate additional white smoke for atmosphere. Weather during the shoot was consistently cold, rainy, and overcast. Conditions Kaminsky felt closely mirrored the actual weather during the historical Normandy landings, lending the footage an additional layer of authenticity. Artificial lighting was used only sparingly, mostly aboard the landing craft, to help illuminate the actors' eyes beneath their helmets. Spielberg kept his camera positioned close to the ground throughout, mimicking the vantage point of a soldier trying to avoid enemy fire or of an embedded combat photographer, with the explicit goal of making audiences feel like participants in the battle rather than passive observers watching from a comfortable distance. Much of the film was shot handheld, which proved physically punishing for camera operator Mitch Dubin and Steadicam operator Chris Harhoff, both of whom spent long stretches low to the ground while navigating through exploding set pieces. The cameras themselves regularly picked up fake blood, water, and sand on their lenses during filming, an unplanned side effect the filmmakers ultimately embraced as adding to the footage's sense of authenticity. Despite the scale of the setups, with explosives, smoke, and choreography involving well over 1,000 people, resetting a botched take could eat up half a day. Yet the majority of shots in the sequence were captured in fewer than 4 takes, often using as many as 3 cameras rolling simultaneously. Spielberg later said he rarely walked away from a scene without getting what he wanted, estimating that his elaborate setups succeeded roughly 80% of the time. Each night, he reviewed the day's footage in a nearby parish hall. Once shooting on the beach wrap, the production crew stayed behind for an additional month to restore Baliniska to its original natural condition, in compliance with an ecological protection order tied to the location. At the end of August, production relocated to Hatfield Aerodrome in Hertfordshire, England, to shoot the remaining scenes, including the climactic battle for the fictional town of Ramel. The filmmakers had scouted actual French towns and rivers for this sequence, but ultimately abandoned that plan over environmental concerns about contaminating local waterways with filming debris. Instead, production designer Sanders and his team built the fictional town of Ramel entirely from scratch on the aerodrome grounds, drawing inspiration from 5 real towns where historical fighting had taken place. The set stretched nearly 3 city blocks and included fully constructed buildings and facades, along with a custom-built 900-foot artificial river, which needed to be carefully lined so its water level could be precisely controlled. Explosives were used extensively to carve out bomb craters and simulate war damage throughout the town set. Although the Ramel battle involved fewer extras overall than the Omaha Beach sequence, its choreography still took several weeks to develop, built around a detailed battle plan devised by Dale Dye. Spielberg deliberately chose not to storyboard the film, preferring to position his camera spontaneously in reaction to the unfolding action in each scene, and he leaned heavily on Dye and other military consultants for guidance on staging combat convincingly. Dye also advised on weapons and explosives. When Spielberg's instincts pushed him toward the larger, more theatrical explosions typical of conventional Hollywood action films, Dye would typically recommend scaling them down substantially noting that real wartime explosions were rarely as large as those seen in movies. The production is estimated to have spent roughly £8 million within the local area around Hatfield during this stretch of filming. Spielberg's spontaneous, reactive approach to directing extended well beyond the battle choreography. Partway through the shoot, he made the decision to shift the perspective of the film's second half toward Upham's point of view, feeling that the character's inexperience mirrored the audience's own unfamiliarity with combat. Adam Goldberg's character was originally only meant to be shot and killed, but Dye suggested adding a hand-to-hand combat sequence on the day of filming, which led to the far more harrowing choice of having Malish stabbed through the heart instead. Separately, a scene in which Ryan reminisces about his brothers was largely improvised by Damon on set rather than scripted in advance. Additional scenes were filmed at other locations around England. The German machine gun nest sequence and the subsequent ambush of a half-track vehicle were shot at Tame Park in Oxfordshire, with the interior of the nearby chapel, where Miller's men rest for the night, also filmed inside the actual Thame Park chapel. The Iowa cornfield scenes depicting Ryan's mother's home were filmed near West Kennet in Wiltshire, using a house built specifically for the production. Interiors depicting the American War Department were filmed back at Hatfield Aerodrome. For these scenes, Kaminsky wanted a noticeably more colorful, warmer look than the desaturated combat footage, achieving this by positioning very bright lighting sources outside the windows. Scenes depicting the elderly version of Ryan were filmed on location at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial in Colville-sur-Mer, France, situated right alongside the real Omaha Beach. Principal photography wrapped ahead of schedule on September 13, 1997 after roughly 12 weeks of filming, concluding with interior scenes shot inside a French church. The film's total estimated budget came to between $65 and $70 million. Post-production for the film's overall color treatment, Kaminsky chose to process his footage using Technicolor's proprietary ENR process, a technique similar to bleach bypass that retains extra silver in the film stock and produces deep, richer blacks. He applied roughly a 70% version of this process to achieve a desaturated image with a subtle blue cast. Concerned that this altered color palette would make the film's fake blood look unconvincing on screen, the effects team mixed blue coloring into the blood itself, giving it a darker, more naturalistic red appearance once filtered through the finished color grade. Visual effects house, industrial light and magic contributed digital enhancements throughout the film, and many of the bullet wounds and blood spatter effects seen on screen were computer generated rather than practical. Longtime Spielberg collaborator Michael Kahn edited the film down to its final 170-minute runtime. Spielberg noted that Kahn's editing style was meant to subvert audience expectations, deliberately avoiding the kind of clean, easily legible transitions typical of conventional studio filmmaking. Certain, especially graphic material, was trimmed from the finished cut, including a scene depicting Miller's unit coming across burnt-out tanks containing charred remains. The death of Malish was also shortened, removing footage of the character screaming in pain, reportedly after Spielberg's own projectionist told him the scene was simply too painful to watch in its original form. Spielberg was adamant that the film needed to look ugly in order to honestly convey the brutality of combat, but he also worried that its graphic violence risked drawing an NC-17 rating from the Motion Picture Association of America, which would have significantly restricted its potential audience by barring anyone under 17 from seeing it, even with a parent. He hoped that the historical significance of the material would be taken into account during the ratings process, and the film ultimately received the less restrictive R rating, meaning younger viewers could still see it if accompanied by an adult. Music composer John Williams, Spielberg's frequent collaborator across decades of films, produced, composed, and conducted the score for Saving Private Ryan. From the outset, Spielberg wanted a comparatively restrained musical presence in the film, preferring to let the sounds of combat and death carry much of the emotional and sensory weight rather than leaning on a conventional score. He and Williams worked through a spotting process, watching a rough cut of the film together to determine precisely which scenes would receive musical accompaniment and which would not. Williams was careful to steer away from anything that might feel grandiose or operatic in tone, aiming instead for something more restrained and elegiac. The finished score runs approximately 55 minutes and was recorded over the course of 3 days at Symphony Hall in Boston, performed by the Boston Symphony Orchestra with vocal contributions from the Tanglewood Festival Chorus. The recording sessions were costly, running to roughly $100,000 per hour of studio time. Spielberg explained his reasoning for choosing that particular orchestra and venue, noting that a story about a company of soldiers seemed well matched to an equally accomplished company of expert musicians, and that recording in the natural acoustics of Symphony Hall, rather than a soundstage engineered for technical correctness, gave the score a richer, warmer quality, capturing the sense of physical space and air around the sound that a studio recording could not replicate. Critics and historians generally agreed that the film became considerably less historically precise once it moved beyond the Omaha Beach sequence. The town of Ramel itself is entirely fictional, as is the battle fought there, and the film also takes dramatic liberties with certain military tactics, much of its dialogue, and some of the methods its characters use to track down Ryan. Total Film magazine, along with some non-American veterans, criticized the film for largely sidelining the contributions of other allied nations throughout the story. British broadcaster Channel 4 pushed back on this criticism, arguing that it missed the point of a film that was, by design, an unapologetically American story. Beyond its immediate reception, Saving Private Ryan is widely credited with reviving broader public interest in World War II history as the century drew to a close. NBC News described the film's stomach-churning violence and emotional intensity as having reshaped the collective cultural memory of the war in the United States. It is frequently cited as one of the most accurate and realistic war films ever produced, particularly in its depiction of the Omaha Beach landing. Film historian Stephen J. Rubin recalled being so absorbed by the film's visceral intensity that he felt it would have been disrespectful to eat his popcorn while watching. Not everyone viewed its cultural impact so favorably, however. Director and Vietnam veteran Oliver Stone argued that Saving Private Ryan, along with later films like Gladiator and Black Hawk Down, contributed to an uncritical glorification of the good war narrative that ultimately made American audiences more receptive to supporting the Iraq War when it began. Similarly, the American academic Paul Fussell criticized the film for pairing an unusually honest and harrowing 15-minute opening sequence with a back half that, in his view, settled into far more conventional and palatable action-adventure territory, comparing its underlying structure to old-fashioned cowboys and Indian storytelling, in which the virtuous side inevitably triumphs. The film's influence on the visual language of subsequent war, action, and even superhero cinema has been widely noted. Vanity Fair argued that virtually no combat films made in the years since would look the way they do without the desaturated, handheld, blood-spattered aesthetic pioneered in the film's extended opening battle, describing it as one of the most imitated and referenced sequences of the late 20th century, regardless of how one ultimately judges its morality. Directors including Quentin Tarantino, Christopher Nolan, and Robert Altman have all cited Saving Private Ryan as a direct influence on their own work. The Los Angeles Times noted that the film's stylistic choice to place audiences physically close to the on-screen action can be traced through later films such as Gladiator, Enemy at the Gates, Pearl Harbor, Flags of Our Fathers, Hacksaw Ridge, and the psychologically intense American Sniper, as well as through numerous modern superhero films. Cinematographer Oren Sofer specifically cited the film's battle sequences as an influence on his work on the science fiction film The Creator. Its influence has extended into television as well, with echoes noted in shows such as Game of Thrones and The Pacific, and into video games most directly through the Medal of Honor series, which Spielberg and DreamWorks developed specifically to translate the film's sense of realism and setting into an interactive format. The success of that franchise, in turn, is widely credited with helping pave the way for the eventual creation of the Call of Duty series. Saving Private Ryan is today widely regarded as one of the greatest war films ever made. Reflecting on its release years later, Spielberg admitted he hadn't anticipated just how successful the film would become, recalling that some close associates had warned him early on that the film was simply too intense and that he worried word of mouth about its brutal opening stretch might scare away much of the potential audience. In 2007, the American Film Institute ranked Saving Private Ryan 71st on its list of the greatest American films of all time, and the organization has also included it among its rankings of the most thrilling, most inspiring, and most epic American films. A 2014 poll of more than 2,000 entertainment industry professionals conducted by The Hollywood Reporter placed the film 46th on a broader list of the best films ever made. Various other publications, including Parade and Variety, have similarly named it among the greatest films of all time, and it is included in the reference volume 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, as well as on Rotten Tomatoes list of 300 essential films. The film is frequently ranked among the very best of both Spielberg's directorial career and Hanks's body of acting work. In a 2025 retrospective, entertainment outlet Vulture included Saving Private Ryan among the best films to have ultimately lost the Best Picture Academy Award. On the review aggregation site Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds a 94% approval rating based on 148 critic reviews with an average score of 8.7 out of 10. The site's consensus summary credits another standout performance from Hanks and praises Spielberg's unflinchingly realistic approach to war filmmaking as having effectively redefined the genre. On Metacritic, the film holds a score of 91 out of 100 based on 38 critic reviews, indicating what the site classifies as universal acclaim. Decades after its release, the film has remained popular with general audiences as well, regularly appearing in reader and viewer polls ranking it among the greatest war films ever made, among the best films of the 1990s, and among the greatest films of all time. Reviews number 1, it isn't a stretch to say that Saving Private Ryan is a beloved war movie. When it was first released, its searing portrayal of World War II combat didn't repel audiences. Instead, it grossed over 480 M worldwide, earning praise from both critics and moviegoers. For 19 years, it was the highest grossing W1 movie ever made until Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk 2017 toppled it last year. Released in 1998, Saving Private Ryan combined the appeal of post-Forrest Gump Tom Hanks with Steve Spielberg's ongoing 002 obsession. After all, it wasn't the director's first movie set in that period, following on from 1941-1979, Empire of the Sun 1987. And Schindler's List 1994, and it paid off, winning 5 Academy Awards, including Best Director, although it missed out on Best Actor to Roberto Benigni for Life is Beautiful, and, more controversially, Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love. It was actually one of very few times the Best Director winner didn't also take home the Best Picture statuette. On its 20th anniversary, we look back at the famous film, and it's actually less impressive on the small screen today. This is a common issue with films that rely so heavily on spectacle and action. When you're not encased in darkness and a relatively distraction-free cinema, the emotions tend to land more lightly. If I'd seen Saving Private Ryan in a cinema again, my experience might be different, but considering most people will now always see it at home, I think it's safe to say that this movie will always suffer. Unless you can perhaps afford a top-end home theater system with 4K projector, 100-second screen, and Dolby Atmos sound, it's tough not to notice the overwhelming American jingoism in this. Especially now we have Dunkirk providing an English counterpart. Saving Private Ryan starts and ends with an image of the US flag and has been criticized for ignoring the efforts of other countries in its portrayal of the Normandy beach landings. The cinematography still stands out. In fact, the movie's desaturated color works even better decades later, with Janusz Kaminski's photography making the film resemble an authentic wartime documentary. The aesthetic has aged spectacularly well because it was always meant to look old. As the story opens with the famous 27-minute-long Omaha beach landing, you are dropped into an action set piece that still lands its punches. Your eyes frantically peer through the camera's POV, scanning for a way out of the frightening destruction happening all around. It's messy and makes for tough viewing. When the sound cuts out and Captain John Miller Hanks struggles to regain his composure in slow motion, shell-shocked, You can't barely stop yourself from yelling at him to take cover. From there, the horrors of war continue. As we see medics prioritizing which soldiers need medical attention the most, soldiers stripping valuable ammo off their dying comrades, and men praying to various deities as they die. And all of that happens within the first half hour. When the US troops start having some success, killing Nazis with startling cruelty and efficiency, you can't help but feel like the enemy deserves it. That's what war does to you, and Spielberg isn't going to sugarcoat it for you. Few bar for sure. When we suddenly move to an office scene, it feels distinctly odd, as if we are awakening from a nightmare, and hence why the proposed mission to rescue one single soldier seems like the worst use of resources. The idea of potentially sacrificing so many for the sake of one continues to rub us the wrong way, with multiple characters speaking out about the futility of this plan. And that becomes the central dichotomy at the heart of Saving Private Ryan. It's sad that it might work too well, because by the end, we are so disillusioned with the idea of the lone hero that each member's death ends up affecting us less and less. It is odd to realize that the death that hits us the hardest is the first of the 8-man squad when Parvati, Caparzo, Vin Diesel, gives up his life trying to save a little girl. Then, as the group of 7 count dog tags and we see medic Wade Giovanni Ribisi give up his life, our hearts slowly turn to ice. It's sad because by the time Capt. Miller sacrifices himself in his final scene, only to find out that it was for nothing. The fighter jet saving them would have done so, regardless of whether he had continued firing at the tank. We just don't care anymore. We just want this terrible war to end, and we want it to end with awards and celebration. But it doesn't. Just as other critics have mentioned, Saving Private Ryan starts strong and ends weak. The sacrifice of the hero ends up being for naught. Maybe that's the point of war, but considering the team took other creative liberties with the story it was based on, it seems half-assed. Luckily, the production hits a home run with its ensemble of actors: Tom Hanks, Tom Sizemore, Edward Burns, Vin Diesel, Giovanni Ribisi, Jeremy Davies, and Matt Damon all act their socks off. They were undoubtedly helped by the famous 10-day boot camp before filming began. The acting's perfectly calibrated, with no one person stealing screen time, even during death scenes. When you see Jeremy Davies' portrayal of the most cowardly soldier only to redeem himself with a single gunshot, it makes you wonder what the actor could done with many other conflicted hero roles. And then there are the pleasant surprises like Ted Danson, Nathan Fillion, and Bryan Cranston, whom I mostly forgot were in this movie. All great actors who were or became famous through television. A viewing of Saving Private Ryan has been known to severely affect war veterans due to its harrowing realism of events, so I'm going to leave it here. Even with its shortcomings and weak ending, this movie has the honor of producing one of the most iconic war sequences in movie history. The fact that it continues to affect audiences to this day, even inspiring directors like Quentin Tarantino with Inglourious Basterds 2009, underscores its enduring impact. Even in this day and age of overstimulations and anything goes digital overload, cast and crew director Steven Spielberg wrote Robert Rodat, starring Tom Hanks, Edward Burns, Matt Damon, Tom Sizemore, Barry Pepper, Adam Goldberg, Vin Diesel, Giovanni Ribisi, Jeremy Davies, Ted Danson, Paul Giamatti, Leland Orser, and Bryan Cranston in patients who simultaneously use antihypertensive drugs. https://shalico. Calm can cause a decrease in blood pressure. https://shell WRID 71H where all visual media incorporated herein is utilized pursuant to the Fair Use Doctrine under 17 USC. Paragraph 107 United States and the Fair Dealing Exceptions under the Copyright Designs and Patents Act 1988 United Kingdom. This content is curated strictly for the purposes of transformative criticism, scholarly commentary, and educational review. Number 2, take that question mark out of the title. Saving Private Ryan 1998 is the greatest war movie ever, period. It has a star-studded cast, brilliant choreography, an experienced director, and it isn't afraid to show the gritty side of war. I may be a bit biased as I have an affinity for war films and Tom Hanks, as our readers already know, but I'm sure that I'm not the only one who feels this way about Saving Private Ryan. Released on July 24, 1998, it is quite possibly one of the most well-directed and beautifully shot movies of all time. On its 20th anniversary, I'd like to take a moment to laud Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. The most overlooked element, some of our more frequent readers may be expecting me to say that the score is the most overlooked element in a movie. Normally, you'd be correct, but not in this case. In this case, I believe the most overlooked element of Saving Private Ryan is the lighting. Yes, something as simple as the lighting. Throughout the movie, the lighting is faded and washed out. Even when the sun is shining, you get the feeling that it's still not very bright or warm. This is meant to reflect the mood of war, especially World War II, cold, dark, and not a whole lot of brightness. I especially appreciate the use of the faded grey lighting used during the rainy scenes, which really give the film that gloomy, dark feel that makes it so realistic. It's an uncomplicated addition to the film, but one that truly sets it apart from other war films. And all-star cast Steve alluded to this element of the film before, but I think it deserves another mention. This film has a menagerie of A-listers, including Tom Hanks, Matt Damon, Vin Diesel, Barry Pepper, Adam Goldberg, Ted Danson, Paul Giamatti, Bryan Cranston, Giovanni Ribisi, Jeremy Davies, and even Nathan Fillion. Sometimes films with large casts can be a hit with audiences, but lack a plot with actual substance. Too many characters and too many plot lines to hit on means that writers have a hard time accommodating all of the cast. However, that is not the case for Robert Rodat, writer for Saving Private Ryan. He created characters with substance behind them that we could empathize with. Unlike other war movies, the characters weren't paper-thin pawns for weapons of destruction. I especially enjoy Tom Hanks's character's development. Captain Miller is the tough, no-nonsense leader of the squad searching for Private Ryan. He seems like a rock, impossible to break and almost unfeeling, but throughout the movie, we see him open up and reveal more to the men he is fighting and dying alongside. We see how the war actually changes the characters. When remembrance meets glorification, let's just collectively admit that there's a fine line between remembering something and glorifying something to make people believe a certain event is cool or trendy. For example, Lincoln 2012 remembers the Civil War, Gone with the Wind 1939 glorifies it. When it comes to war movies, it's very easy to glorify instead of remember. Just look at Full Metal Jacket, 1987. Its swinging tunes and its body humor glorify the Vietnam War to feel like some sort of demented death trap, but Saving Private Ryan doesn't fall into that trap. The characters in our story may have friendships with one another and they may even share a joke or a smile every so often, but we are never fooled into thinking that war is fun. We are shown that war is cold, uncomfortable, dangerous, heartbreaking, and basically pure hell. There's something about Tom Hanks. Yes, I know. I have a very high opinion of Tom Hanks, but it's not a totally unfounded opinion. His performance in Saving Private Ryan is the best in his career. Let's look into a few examples. The first example I have is the best. After Wade dies and the others are burying him, Captain Miller goes off on his own, presumably to review his map, but what he does is more revealing. He goes off to cry. It's a telling moment in his character because up until now, we've seen no crack in his strong persona. But Tom Hanks shows how the war has worn down Captain Miller from a confident, sure man to a broken one who's seen too much. Also, Hanks is really good at crying on cue. The second example is Captain Miller's death scene, another great depiction of the character's personality. Even after being fatally wounded, Captain Miller continues to fight with a defiant stare. Until the last bullet leaves his gun, he perseveres, knowing all the while that it's useless. Hanks does a fantastic job of portraying a man on his last straw, nothing left but still fighting. And the final example I'll share with you, though there are many more in the film, is the interaction between Tom Hanks and Matt Damon before the final fight. To break up some tension, Private Ryan Damon tells Captain Miller a funny story from his youth. I have always particularly liked this scene because we get to see the apex of Captain Miller's development. Finally, after the long months of slogging through the mud and death of war, he smiles and laughs. He is relieved that his mission is completed, and it shows in the brightness in his eyes. Overall, I wish this had been one of the movies Tom Hanks had won an Oscar for, as it is, in my humble opinion, his best work. Let's sum up, shall we? Saving Private Ryan is hands down the best war movie ever made. It's realistic without glorifying a truly violent event. It has great performances from great actors. And director Steven Spielberg utilized the lighting and cinematography of the film in such a brilliant way. While you may not be a fan of war movies or, heaven forbid, not a fan of Tom Hanks, you have to admit that Saving Private Ryan is an excellent piece of filmmaking. I will forever be miffed that it lost the Best Picture Oscar to Shakespeare in Love 1998, since it is obviously one of the best films ever made. Thank you for reading. What are your thoughts on Saving Private Ryan? Comment down below. If you enjoyed this article, subscribe to Movie Babble via email to stay up to date on the latest content, joining Movie Babble on Patreon so that new content will always be possible. What movie topic should I discuss next? Whether it be old or new, the choice is up to you. Number 3, Steven Spielberg's Oscar-winning World War II drama Saving Private Ryan will be back in UK cinemas in 4K from December 1st. To celebrate the 25th anniversary of director Steven Spielberg's critically lauded World War II epic Saving Private Ryan, the film will be back in cinemas across the UK and Ireland from Friday, December 1. For the first time ever, the film will be available to watch in cinemas in 4K, boasting a stellar cast headed by Tom Hanks, Matt Damon, Edward Burns, Tom Sizemore, Ted Danson, Giovanni Ribisi, Vin Diesel. One of the greatest war films ever made, stars Paul Giamatti and Barry Pepper. They film Saving Private Ryan is a co-production of DreamWorks Pictures and Paramount Pictures. The film won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Director, and 2 Golden Globes, including Best Director and Best Motion Picture Drama. The AFI recognized it as one of the 100 greatest American films as well. Possibly the finest war film ever made will be back in UK cinemas in 4K from December 1st. Are you a fan of the film? Do you believe that it could be considered one of the greatest war films ever produced? Do you agree that the opening Omaha beach scene is brutal but honest? Head down to the comments section to let us know. We look forward to hearing from you. Introducing Carl. As the news editor at Future of the Force, Carl has been an invaluable member of our team since early 2016. His expertise and dedication have made him an integral part of our editorial staff. Beyond his professional role, Carl is a fervent supporter of Liverpool FC and an avid follower of pop culture. He has a deep passion for Halloween, Friday the 13th, and the iconic movie franchises Star Wars and Star Trek. He can be found either at his neighborhood cinema, enjoying the latest releases on the big screen, or at home streaming the newest blockbuster movies.